Hi, I'm Damon Bonser, CEO of British Design Fund, and I'm joined today by George Gallagher, founder and CEO at EAT. I'll let you give the full name of your business because I was pronouncing it incorrectly. George, lovely to have you with us today, one of our latest investments.
Thank you very much for having me.
So the purpose of these little conversations really to get to know a little bit about you, your background, why you set your business up, what the technology is, and the kind of plans for this year. And so we share it with our investor community, so they know what's going on here at the British Design Fund. So George, over to you. Tell us a little bit about the technology you've developed. It would be great to start things off for those that don't know.
Super. Well, thank you very much for having me, and firstly, thank you all at the British Design Fund for supporting us. It's super important for our growth that we're experiencing right now. So we set out to develop a device to assist clinicians and doctors to place nasogastric feeding tubes. Now, I'm sure probably most of the investors are probably not familiar with what these are, but when I show you one, then you probably will. So this is an NG tube, and typically they're inserted into patients' noses, and they travel down to the stomach, and it's a way of getting food and medication into patients who can't ordinarily swallow food and nutrition. Unfortunately, though, it's a fairly common event where when they're inserting the feeding tube, the end of the tube ends up in their lungs, which, as I'm sure you can imagine, if any of us have had some bread when we're having dinner at a restaurant and it goes down the wrong pipe, the coughing fit you have when bread goes in the wrong way. Well, if you can imagine a feeding tube being put into your lungs, and then being missed, and then porridge being poured into your lung, it's a pretty gruesome death when it occurs, and it happens far more often than any of us would like to admit to, really. So my background is medical devices. I started out in medical devices 25 years ago, originally developing an IV infusion device. I was actually a family member was in hospital, and her IV drip kept stopping. So I took some optical fiber sensing that I was using in an industrial factory, made a prototype, took it into my local hospital, cable tied it onto her IV drip stand, and every time a drip stopped, it set a car horn off that I'd wired up to it. Drove the nurses potty, but it enabled them to come and sort their IV drip out. That was my first device, and that device I later then learned about medical devices, regulatory affairs, brought the product to market and sold it to Baxter Healthcare in 2002. So that was my baptism into medical devices. We're quite keen on not trying to invent something and looking for an application for it, which often is the case. We tend to look for real life problems and then try to solve them, but solve them with existing practices. And that's kind of what we've done here with our device double check. Is we've kept the procedure very similar to what the nurses already do, but we've added some safety barriers alongside it. And in that, what we do is when they insert the feeding tube now, we make them stop halfway, and then we check for CO2. So on the device here, you can see at the bottom there's CO2, and at the top there's pH. So they pull up the syringe. If you get a CO2 reading here halfway in, then you're in the airway, and you would end up in the lungs ultimately if you carried on. So we tell them to stop, withdraw the feeding tube, and then that solves that problem. If you don't get CO2 here, then you know that you are in fact in the esophagus, and you're traveling down to the stomach. When you get to the stomach, you then check for pH, and then you can confirm you're in the stomach, and you can start feeding.
Very good. So I suppose just so your background is in medical devices. So I suppose it's not a surprise that you've come up with this technology. But was there a moment, was there a sort of eureka moment, or a kind of when the penny dropped and you thought, how is this not out in the market? Like, how did you spot this opportunity?
So I think just spending a lot of time in hospitals, and I've spoken to a lot of nurses, and I've got to see how they do their procedures. And also, when I was born, my esophagus was joined to my lungs at birth. So at an 8-hour-old baby, I had to have a major surgery. The oldest child was 6 years old who'd had the procedure, so it was a very new procedure. So they didn't know how I was going to recover after this. I had a feeding tube for, I think my mum's told me, up to 6 months after the procedure. So it was a really, and it wasn't a pleasant experience. Apparently, I was very distressed whenever the feeding tube would go in me. So this has highlighted an area.
Yeah, understood. And who else is there, sort of apart from yourself, George? What's the team look like?
So we've got a great team. We're a very small team, bit of an elite SAS team. The trick of a startup and a a founder, if you like, is knowing what you're good at, but more importantly, knowing what you're not good at. So I make sure I have the right people around me. So we have a fantastic R&D manager who's worked with me for 20 odd years. So he's great at designing products with us. But when we design things, we always have an eye on, can it be manufactured? A lot of people can make a great prototype, but then when you start thinking about, well, can you mass produce this at a sensible end price? Then it can't. So Rob does this for me. So then we have a really good quality and regulatory manager full time. So he makes sure that we have all of the necessary regulatory approvals. So we have the CA mark for the UK, we have CE mark for Europe, and I'm very proud to say we have our FDA 510K approval, which was enable us to start the sales, which we are revenue generating in the US. We have a national sales manager who looks after our distributor in the UK. And then we have a really strong team back at headquarters because we now have our manufacturing in-house, which we're very proud of. So we have a really strong team and ready to cope with the growing demand that's building.
Very good. Where's your manufacturing base?
So we have an office in Liverpool, but our manufacturing and warehouses in North Wales, in a small town called Cerwis.
Brilliant. And then what can we expect sort of, well, not this year, because we're almost at the end of the year. It's November at the moment. But what can we expect next year? What sort of the headline plans? What do you hope when you get to sort of Christmas next year, what will a successful year have looked like?
So we're on a really strong growth trajectory. So we're looking to close a growth investment round in the next 2 months, more like 4 weeks, hopefully, which is a 2.1 million growth round that will enable us to really capitalize on the sales that we have. So at the moment, we have in the US, there's a competitor product that's just been discontinued by Cardinal Healthcare. And they very kindly are writing to their customers and telling them that they no longer can supply. However, we are an alternative. So we've now got 40 hospitals in the US buying our products. That's nearly doubled, more than doubled, nearly trebled our manufacturing output requirement for January 2026. And then in the UK, there is a real swell of awareness now on feeding tube misplacements, excuse me, and our technology. And we understand there is a new government positioning paper due out. We hope at the end of the year, but certainly be early next year. And in it mandates the use of CO2 and pH when inserting a feeding tube. When that hits the hospitals, that opens up every single door. Because at the moment, they could be a case of, well, the NHS is stretched, money is tight, and time is even tighter. Even though our return on investment calculator shows we save every hospital we've been to tens of thousands, with the government paper saying you ought to be using pH and CO2, it's very difficult for them not then to at the very least do an assessment of our product for them adoption. So we think the UK is going to explode in the same way the US has.
Very good. That's very timely, that paper being produced. Were you guys any part of writing that, or is it just fortunate timing?
We have a very excellent gentleman on our clinical advisory board who is very well recognized and published. And also we work very closely with the two main safety committees, the National Nutritional Nurses Group and NGSIG, which is the Naso Gastric Special Interest Safety Group. They've written the paper. Also, one of our customers, there's a gentleman there at Bristol, where he's a prolific publishing of clinical data. He's done a study in our product, and he's fed those results into it as well. So there's a real cohort of people coming together, getting in behind the product, which we just couldn't do on our own.
That's great. No, you're part of it and leading that change. George, thank you very much. Look, we're delighted to be working with you and part of your journey and such an impactful product as well. And looking forward to next year, 2026, and supporting your growth. Thank you very much, George.
Thank you, Damon.